All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Matty Crescenzo. I'm a founder of Valet Health and excited about the presentation today and data-driven insights for ROI. Here we'll be co-presenting with Chris Gowa of Vita Interaction. Hey, Chris.
Hi, how you doing?
All right.
Thanks for joining.
For sure. Appreciate it and appreciate all those that'll be watching this playback or able to attend the webinar. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get things kicked off here. Does that sound good, Chris?
Sounds great.
Okay, great. Awesome. Cool. Well, really the theme of today's talk, as we go through the different sections, you'll find between our section here with Valet Health and with Vital Interaction is the thread that ties everything together is tracking and measuring data to be able to quantify ROI. And so really the section that we're going to talk about here as we look at overall a digital program journey that's implemented within healthcare. So this could be within physician practices or within a healthcare system. Overall, the three key areas are to be able to shore up data accuracy, claim and protect online reputation, two, being able to run analysis and have smart targeting to have data insights that can be acted upon, and then three, iterating and making those changes to be able to build upon systematic, scalable, smarter growth. One study that was interesting from 2021 that stands out, if we look at overall the consumerization of healthcare and how patients increasingly have expectations as consumers, right, with a Amazon-like experience, being able to know and measure even what the cost it is to generate a new patient lead, a new patient opportunity. $286 across healthcare is the average. That's data sourced by HubSpot. So if you think of that data point, and it makes you wonder, okay, well, what's my cost per lead? What's the cost to generate a new patient opportunity? And when you think of that whole section of new patient acquisition, that's one of the pieces that we're talking about here with Valet Health is attracting new patients and prospects to the practice. And the component that Chris is going to talk about with Vital Interaction is in patient engagement, so existing patients. We thought this was interesting to point out. We believe this is a high number. Your cost to generate a lead should be ideally under $100 to generate a new patient opportunity. And the other key metrics which we're going to look at too to be able to track our cost per acquisition and then return on investment. So as we look at an overall hierarchy for digital program success, it does start from the bottom up with this foundation of accurate online reputation information, clinic and location data, local listings. All this has to be shored up and accurate and standardized before volume is driven to your website or to these profiles, whether they be physician or clinic listing profiles. And then to be able to have growth that's systematic and scalable, you need the technology and infrastructure. So there's a couple of ways of looking at from the tech side of things. There's your website. There's all different integrations that go into your website, but there's also technical solutions such as what Vital Interaction has that engages an existing patient population and being able to have smart targeting of that. So if you take the technology that's important for attracting new prospects and then engaging existing, that takes us up to the path to attracting traffic and then conversion. So when we use terms like conversion, we mean on our side, we mean the conversion of a new patient opportunity into a patient has been seen. So a lead into a patient seen by a physician. And then from the perspective of conversion, right, Chris, for you with engagement, it's them taking an action based on perhaps a recall campaign or another initiative. They're already a patient, right? But you're doing some level of campaigns that's going to get them to take a further conversion action. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's one thing to generate new patients, and then there's another thing, once they are patients, how do we manage their care? How do we help you keep your patients? And, just sort of making sure that they come back for their regular visits.
Right. Exactly. So going back to being able to attract new and what's out there in sort of these third-party sites and health review sites such as WebMD, Vitals, HealthGrades, this begs the question, right? How much of your online presence do you actually control? So much of information that's out there. In fact, what we see at baseline is 78% of information about providers and clinic locations is wrong. This is in a sample size of over 2,500 profiles for providers and clinics. And so we see at baseline, prior to all this being shored up and standardized, 78% of it is wrong. So you think of all the lost opportunities for new patients, and you think of the confusion potentially for consumers and in the marketplace. That's just something that we see as immediate area to improve and low-hanging fruit when the data error rates are that high. And this complex ecosystem of data aggregators and all these sites, right? So you have local sites such as Google, Yelp, even Apple Map listings. Then you have the health sites, the big ones, WebMD, Vitals, HealthGrades, RateMDs. This is what creates the complexity of inaccurate information of when people come across these profiles that aren't managed, let alone optimized. So the first step is being able to make it accurate and having it all standardized. But this is what causes the chaos and the issues in those data error rates. And so when that reputation is left to chance on significant sites such as WebMD, there can be even competing physicians that can run ads on a profile. WebMD, 1 out of every 4 adults within the US utilize WebMD for self-diagnosing, for condition, symptom-related, treatment-related information. There's over 1.2 billion traffic visits that go there per year. So you're talking about substantial audience reach, and there's not even another health review site or health information site that's close to that level of volume. So being able to prioritize your efforts and shoring up your online data and reputation on sites like WebMD and then Vitals, significant source of reviews, over 11 million reviews and ratings for physicians. But here's an example of when an online reputation is left to chance on a WebMD profile. This you could see a lot of times there are as physician practice information or location info is inaccurate. Photos, sometimes you'll see even a silhouette, won't even see a picture of the doctor, or it's really outdated. The information about that doctor is on the conditions or treatments that he or she offers is inaccurate. And then you see ads that are run on it. In addition, you'll see featured providers. These are sponsored result ads that are piggybacking off of the reputation of a physician who did not take advantage of optimizing or claiming a WebMD profile or making it an enhanced profile. And so if you look at that and juxtapose that example of, again, you can think of opportunities that are lost as a result of no action. Contrast that with one that is optimized, and you see here's a physician with a fully optimized WebMD and what's called an enhanced profile. And what that means are the ads are removed, the conditions, the procedures are updated, and then even there's appointment request tracking, inbound calls that can be tracked, proper brand affiliation with the practice. So this is what we mean by being able to attract new prospects and new patients. So we're removing those roadblocks to visibility, and we're creating something forward-facing that, one, is accurate, that's optimized. More importantly, it's trackable to be able to quantify an ROI. And I'll show you something on that in just in a moment of how we get to ROI. And then here's an example too of that enhanced visibility in an enhanced profile like that, where even when consumers are conducting searches for where they may feel pain. Here's an example of a local area. Somebody searches back pain, they go into a specific area. Here's Monroe, Louisiana, for instance. And these sponsored results are ads that are showing in enhanced profiles. This does not happen by default. You specifically need an enhanced profile to have this additional visibility for lead generation. We've found at Valet Health, across our client base, this to be the highest conversion percentage. This as a tactic, not on a volume basis, but on a conversion basis into new patients that are seen. So it's something typically that we see at baseline practices or even health systems with sophisticated digital technology in place are not taking advantage of something like this. And so the key, though, is going all the way from consumer level local market data with WebMD. So looking at consumer activity in your specific target market and being able to run these ads to then look at activity on ads that are shown up Most importantly, though, leads generated and patients seen. So this, as you'll hear in a very similar way to be able to measure ROI, this is when Chris speaks to his part, this is ROI of what we're able to measure and quantify. And we encourage that any digital company that you're working with has full accountability to substantive metrics like this. What's the cost to acquire a new patient? What's the return on investment from any activities that you're doing in digital? This is just an example of through WebMD, and being able to look at the lifetime of the performance as well. So if you think about, overall building out a program to reach people, you want to be and meet patients where they are on these high traffic, high profile sites. But the key is you wanted a capability to measure and track all the way through that growth funnel so that you know what your ROI through these different channels. And typically, the best way to be able to build a program that can be systematic, that can scale in attracting and engaging a target audience is one that is leveraging multiple channels, right? So in terms of, for instance, you see here, email communication, we would run, and we recommend running education, lead nurture types of campaigns via email. But I know in different use cases with emails or text, Chris, I know that you're going to speak to personalized communications, correct?
Yep.
And that for engaging an existing patient population.
Yeah, definitely. I think, it's one thing to have data. There's another thing, what kind of message are you going to be delivering? How personalized can you make that message and resulting in better success?
Exactly. So again, we're going back to what we've talked about of attracting new, but being able to target specific patient populations who are prospects. And then if you look at the other piece of it, engaging an existing patient population, which Chris will go further into that. Then overall with a digital program, looking at multiple channels, such as thinking through the right way to do social media and engaging a target audience, the right way, meaning being able to have buyer patient personas where perhaps 3 or 4 types of personas that you're trying to target and create content and messaging to that. Also utilizing data insights to write content and build content around what consumers are searching for, and do that where your tactics are working in tandem together, right? So you're running ad campaigns and based, for example, and if you're running display, retargeting, Google ads, Facebook ads, the information that you're learning on those channels, you should cross-pollinate and utilize that in organic social media campaigns or in blog posts that you're writing and creating, so that you don't have data silos, but you have a multi-channel type of approach where you're taking that intelligence and building a smarter, more systematic way to grow your program. And then with all of that being said, where the rubber meets the road again is how new patient conversions are reported. So this is what's interesting from a state of digital marketing in healthcare. In this survey, when there's a survey for healthcare digital marketing executives, 55% of those execs report knowledge of monitoring conversion related metrics. And we think that's a low number, right? We expect that number to be much higher, and over time it will be higher as more visibility is brought to the importance of data attribution, measuring ROI, specifically within healthcare and healthcare marketing ROI. So although that's the number now, and the point here is that's relatively low, we would expect that number to increase over time as technological solutions and processes are built out to be able to quantify ROI. And really the other question to keep in mind is, do you have accurate, consistent data insights for these 3 metrics? So if you're running a program to attract new patients in the door, we recommend these 3 metrics for you to be able to track and look at systematically, month over month, quarter over quarter, and then year over year. First metric, how many new people are you reaching, new users? That's at the very top of the funnel through all those various activities. Then 2, what's your conversion into new patient leads? So these are prospects. These are patients that haven't been seen yet, but those are leads. So they could have opted in via form submission, like an appointment request. They could have called an inbound, a tracking number, but that's a lead. And then the bottom low funnel, are new patients, patients that are actually seen by a physician for an initial consult. And at that point, you'll have visibility into the 3 layers of the funnel. And that's just something that when you can see that all the way through, then it's no longer a black box, right? Then you'll know where your marketing dollars are working, how they're performing, and what your return is. And so looking at the types of metrics that we touched on in that prior slide, looking at multiple channels and lifetime seeing, is a program building and growing over time in lead generation, in patient seen, in ROI? Are substantive growth metrics provided to you? And if they're not, with whomever you're working with in terms of digital marketing or digital support company, just ensure that that type of information is made available to you, and understand what the roadblocks are to getting that if it's not. And additionally, the way to further iterate and make improvements in a campaign, A/B test the pages, for example, landing pages that you're building out. What works best for your target audience for trying to attract new patient prospects, right? So you could split the traffic 50-50 and create an A and a B landing page and see which generates more new patient opportunities. And ultimately, success will be measured by the more leads that are generated and then new patients that are seen. So similarly, I know, Chris, that you do the same thing with A/B testing, but you're applying it to a different audience, right? To an existing patient population, right? Is there more success and response rates in one campaign versus another? So
yeah, and I love doing those sort of tests. I've become a bit of a dork when it comes to A/B testing, honestly. And and I'll go over that in a sec. But I think that's what we're committed to, is finding out what is the best process, and the only way to do that is to test everything that you can.
Exactly. It's a great point too. It's the antithesis of a stagnant approach. It's a dynamic approach that's always looking at data, trends, testing to be able to push for continuous improvement. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So again, these principles and this kind of approach applies to all that, Chris, that you'll be talking about for existing patient engagement, and then for prospective new patient acquisition. So overall, and we'll close out my portion of it here at the outset, is when you look at all this marketing data, the key is being able to drive to action and getting to a program return on investment. So just in summary, with the 2 tips here for our audience here to be able to walk away with value from this section, ask a digital support company, 1, what's the cost per lead? Interestingly, right? See if yours, where it lands in relation to that earlier slide we looked at $286 cost per lead. So what is your cost per lead? Then what's your cost per acquisition of a new patient in the door? And then can ROI be measured on an ongoing basis? And then in the second piece of that, it's important to ask the types of questions about, well, what about data integrations with your level of tracking? How is this information going to be reported back to you as a client on who's responsible for the analysis? Are you left with trying to figure out this really dense, complicated analysis and what's next? Or do you know what the specific next steps are based on the information that's been gathered? But so overall, hopefully this first section, as we walk through in summary, helps you see that, 1, certainly it is possible to truly measure return on investment in marketing and healthcare marketing specifically for your program. And that you'll see that the foundation of that is being able to measure and track data and have ongoing testing for improvement. And then you're going to see, as a segue to Chris, your part, you're going to see those very same principles, this kind of disciplined, systematic approach applies to existing patient engagement as well. So with that being said, I'll flip it over to you, Chris, and look forward to hearing your part.
Yeah, thank you, Matty. And I think, as you mentioned, there's sort of 2 buckets here. 1, how do you attract new patients? And then once they become patients, what can we do to help those patients come back into the office? And so when you start thinking about, so if we switch gears slightly, now I have patients, Vital Interaction integrates with many PM systems, and we ingest all of the data. And I think what's important is, for example, let's think of the baseline of I need a list of patients to come back to the office that haven't been seen in a year. So that's a very important piece because, you know, an eye exam probably should occur every year. Or another example of a patient list might be, let's look at certain CPT or ICD codes. Patients who have a certain diagnosis may put them at risk. And with our smart targeting of patient lists, you're able to target these patients. And many practices, it's important to get patients back into the office, even if it's a no-show or canceled. If you start thinking about the ways that you can start targeting these patients on an automated basis and automating our ROI. So for example, let's look at, again, I'll use the same example, all patients that haven't had an appointment in 1 year, let's message them and actually measure the success or how many of those patients that we message actually end up being converted. And I'm excited to show those results to you. But under the hood of our smart list engine, if you see here on the build section, again, we'll look at all appointments in a certain date range. So any patient that hasn't had an appointment in 1 year for an annual exam. And then we have the ability to subtract any of those patients that have been back since or have a future appointment on an automated basis. And I think that that's powerful in a way that you know that you're targeting the exact patients that you want and you need them to come back. And then we can set up an automated campaign to where text message, phone call, or email, depending on the patient preference. And I think that's where we can take existing data and make it actionable. And so from here, let's just go over some simple statistics with the power of text, email, or voice calls. You know, we all know that text message is basically the number one way of communicating. And we see that 98% of patients are likely to open a text message. And then the same with email. And when you combine the two, it's so a patient might not have a text message as a preference. Let's see if they have an email as a preference or a phone call. And open rates do increase if we personalize that email message. And then I'll touch on this case study in a sec with voice calls. We found that patients are 3 times more likely to listen to the message if it's from the provider themselves, which is to say, what if a provider could record the actual message that goes out to the patients to say, hey, I've noticed you haven't had an appointment in some time. Your eye care is important to us. Please call us to schedule. And I think that element of personalization has been really very intriguing in terms of our data analysis and ROI. And so back to the provider recordings, we did a case study to where we had providers record the messages, but usually the inbound call going to the patient might not have a caller ID. And we do know that there is a problem. If you don't recognize the number or it's not saved in your phone, you're likely not going to answer. But given that, we did find that out of all the messages received, 9.8% of those patients ended up scheduling a future appointment even without a caller ID. And we had great feedback in that patients were able to hear the messages from their care provider. And I think that's important. But then we thought, okay, what if we added a caller ID onto that number? So it looks like it's coming from the doctor or practice themselves. And as soon as the patient picks up the phone, it's the voice of their provider. And that almost doubled in success rate of 17.4 if we add those two. And I think that was very compelling with that. So then we thought, how can we apply this to other industries? So I'll show you this case study that we did. And most practices enter recalls when a patient leaves an office, but what if they don't? And so that is where the annual reactivation recalls come into play. So with this, we looked at this over a couple of quarters to see, okay, we onboarded a large practice. We had 39,000 recalls go out that the practice entered themselves. And that led to a pretty great success rate of around 10%. But then we thought, what if the patient doesn't have a recall in the system or an appointment? So then we built through the smart list engine, all patients that haven't had an appointment, no recall in 1 year and no future appointment scheduled. And then you can see as a result of those additional recalls, the appointment volume went from 84,000 to 92,000. So it's directly proportional. The more recalls that you add and the targeted smart lists, the more likely you're going to increase your appointment volume overall. And then we thought, well, what if we take this a step further and add those provider recalls to the messages that the patients are receiving? And then upon that, we can see up to 104,000 appointments. So that was really cool to see, honestly. And I think over a 20% increase in appointment volume over the case study as a result of a smart targeted list. And also, how are we delivering those messages? It's one thing to have all this data and send a message, but what does the message say? How can we make it super personable? And that's just one example of a provider recorded recall plus the annual that clearly shows the return on investment to be huge, honestly.
This is great, Chris. I had a question for you back to, with that case study, just overall, what would you say is, groups prior to you working with them? I mean, what is their baseline in terms of how, one, are they aware of, or do they say, okay, well, we're using this in our PM system for recalls? Like, well, I mean, I know there's so many different systems, right? But I'm sure the functionality is limited. But the fact that, one, you can make them aware of this kind of data, but then you can automate the ability to do these campaigns. Like, what does that look like from when they first come in before Vital Interaction, and then they have it after? Like, what do they like? What's their current setup before you start with them, like with their PM system? Like, are they really not doing much at all with it, or?
Yeah, a lot of practices, if they don't have any software in place like ours or yours, it's usually a manual call. So if it's an eye care group, for example, most practices do enter a recall. So let's say, for example, you just finished your annual exam, go check out of your appointment, the practice will typically enter a recall, right? You should come back in 1 year. But without a system like ours, it's up to the practice to call those patients manually. So there's one thing to onboard automating recalls or even appointment reminders, because that's coming directly from the practice management system. But we could take it to a next level to say, okay, we have all this data. What are we missing? We need to target patients with a CB or a certain diagnosis. We need to make sure that these patients come back because they're super at risk. So it's almost in complementary to the existing workflow, but let's try to save practices time. It takes a lot of work to not only target those patients, but actually call those patients manually as well. And then to the automation piece, I think the ability to add and subtract certain criteria is also a key component to this, because I think anyone can probably download a list of patients from the practice management system. But I think one thing that's often overlooked is, what's your inclusion or exclusion criteria? And not only that, could I automate that inclusion, exclusion criteria?
Yep.
Did that help answer the question?
It does. Yeah, that's excellent. Yep.
Yeah, and I think by virtue, I might have explained this slide already, but in terms of the setup process, so we'll work with practices. Let's define a target list of patients. What's important to the practice? And in this particular example, during COVID, lots of practices had to close down. And then it's just a mad rush, mad scramble to try and get those patients back. Appointment volume is decreasing, obviously, because patients may have slipped through the cracks. So we were tasked with defining a list of target patients. Let's get patients that had to cancel their appointment during this time, or let's just get patients back into the office. We need appointments. We need, honestly, just to drive revenue, and not only revenue, but make sure patients get care. So through the smart list engine, we were able to target all those patients and single out patients that haven't had an appointment and should be coming back. And then we have the automated outreach part that we've discussed with text, email, or voice. Let's personalize that. And then upon showing the return on investment, can we pivot? Can we change it? What can we do better? And I think that's what we're committed to doing in terms of the onboarding process. But again, in this case study, after 3 months of implementing this automated outreach for patients that haven't had an appointment, a 17% volume increase in appointments, which the return on investment of that is fantastic, considering it's a plug and play feature that we can offer. and it alleviates the stress of having to manually call these patients. And we can provide that return on investment and show which patients scheduled, which patients did not schedule. If they didn't schedule, do we need another touch point? Do we need to add another measure? And so I think it's all about pivoting and that service element of the automation that's key. And again, 55% response rate from the messages that we delivered. So we know patients are engaging with our messages, and that resulted in 17% appointment volume increase, which is really cool. And yeah, those were the case studies, and I think this is fantastic. And as we continue to learn and find out ways of personalization, I think, Matty, it's been great to work with you, and I can clearly see how the systems can complement each other. Your piece is just as important in attracting new patients as what do we do with existing patients, and it closes the loop. And I think
it does, and I think what this does, it provides overall, right? All of you who are watching this webinar playback, as you think about your strategy going into 2022, and really do do an honest assessment of where are the gaps. Even if you started in either of these areas, attracting new patients, or if it's existing patient engagement, finding smarter ways to be able to reach target audience, again, whether it's prospects or it's existing patients, but having accountability to ultimately to ROI, right? And so whether that was going through a specific engagement and looking at what this looks like with Vital Interaction, or with us with Valet Health, either way, knowing that as you think of 2022 and beyond, and again, the increase in consumerization in healthcare, this will continue to be more and more important. And looking at these types of solutions and how it's interwoven through data and through measuring ROI, hopefully that creates some excitement for what can be done. And we would love the opportunity to be able to speak further and provide value and help in any way that we can, both from Valet Health and Vital Interaction perspective. So we appreciate everybody's attention today.
Yeah, thanks so much. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to webinars@vitalinteraction.com.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everybody.